Hey everyone, it's Dante Ferrigno at Ferrigno Freedom Channel coming back to you to share another video. I have really been thinking about this whole situation with caffeine and coffee a lot lately because, as some of you may know, I work in a restaurant full time aside from doing YouTube, and it's been challenging to stay away from coffee when I work a swing shift and I'm around some of the best coffee available all the time. And I have a hard time avoiding getting a couple of shots of espresso and some hot water and making myself a little Americano when I'm having a hard time with the sleep changes. When I first started doing Lion Diet, one of the things that I found to be so relieving was working a 9 to 5 job, or even when I was living off of my savings, I could be in a regular schedule. I was getting up every morning at 4:30, get up, go, do what I got to do, get my exercise done, get videos done, do work around the house, work with my wife, have fun with the kids and the family. But since I've been working this swing shift, it has really been a challenge to get to sleep on time when you get home at 11:30, 12 o'clock at night sometimes, and then on other nights you've got to get up at 4:30 in the morning to be able to get to work on time. It can be a challenge, and I am actually glad for the opportunity to have that work situation because, for one, I think it was maybe, I don't know if you'd say a little unfair, but it was definitely skewing my viewpoint on how this diet has affected me and how other people have told me it's affected them. A handful of people have told me that they want to know why they don't notice the big energy boost that I had. And then I come to find out some of these folks are truckers and they're working all kind of crazy hours, or they're working swing shifts, or they're working graveyard shift, and they're having to use stimulants to be able to push themselves through the day. And I really want to get away from it. I want to get away from it. As a matter of fact, it weighs heavy on my mind enough to where I'm like, I don't know if I can keep doing this, just because it's so rough on the mind to have your circadian rhythm just totally out of balance by all the different times a day going to bed. I remember Jordan Peterson once saying that, man, just pick a time that's your bedtime, make that the time that you go to bed, and then wake up the same day, at the same time every morning, and you'll be much better off. I assumed that he was correct, and I thought, that sounds logical, but it's something to know it when you hear it, and it's totally something else to experience it. Like I've been experiencing it since I've been working jobs that aren't 9 to 5. I started in December working at UPS as a graveyard shift, and then hours got cut back and cut back and cut back at that job until I finally had to say, you know what, I'm going to have to go, guys. I got to find something that's going to pay the bills. And then I started working at this restaurant, and everything was going kind of okay because they just had me working in the mornings. And then I put my foot in my mouth and said, look, I'm available whenever you need me, because they were starting to cut hours too after the busy season went away. And that's, financially that was making it a little bit tougher too. So I wanted to be more available. And now they have me working nights 3 to 4 days a week and working mornings 1 to 2 days a week. And it's tough. It's tough. And I used to run a schedule for people. I was the administrator at a retirement home, and I'd have people that would work 11 to 7 at night, 7 to 3 in the afternoon, and 3 to 11 at night. And not necessarily the same people. I tried to keep people on the same shift because I thought, that's going to be a lot more convenient for them. But there was 1 or 2 people that they would float. They would float from one to the other. They could, or even work all 3 shifts, varying depending on what their availability was, and working double shifts. And you got to do what you got to do to get through the day. But the question is, are we doing ourselves any favor when we start loading up on caffeine? And ever since I was able to kick stimulants early on doing Lion Diet, it really has had a freeing effect on me mentally to not be needing those things. And having access to coffee when I have a swing shift and a crazy schedule, I've noticed some differences. I've noticed that I have a harder time overcoming adversity and not letting it become stress in my life. That anxiety tends to hang on, even though mentally I can handle it a whole lot better than I could before Lion Diet by a long shot. Before I started doing Lion Diet, my anxiety level was off the charts. It was just not where it should be, and I think a lot of that was what was causing my gut issues. So maintaining this equilibrium in my mental state is very important to me. I would think it's important to you as well, because a lot of people that I've spoken to have talked about this very thing, about how lion diet and in some cases just carnivore diet has changed their ability to manage stress and anxiety and even depression. When you have a lot of pressure in your life, when you have a lot of responsibility and you're taking on a lot of responsibility, that can easily become anxiety and eventually depression again if you're not careful. And the question is, are the chemicals or stimulants we're using to push through certain things helping or hurting us? And one of the people that I've taken, aside from Dr. Jordan Peterson, who showed me the way to lion diet to begin with, one of the people that I have found to be a very good source of information for neuroscience and how our brain works and how it affects our body as well is Dr. Andrew Huberman of Stanford University. And he has a YouTube channel that is just fantastic. Some of his videos are just a bit too long sometimes to watch all of. But I found one on another channel called Neuro Lifestyle where they were speaking with Dr. Huberman about caffeine. And it's titled Neuroscientist, Ugly Truth About Caffeine, Andrew Huberman. So let's take a look at this video and see what Dr. Huberman has to say about caffeine. Let's try to figure out what it is that's going to help us to either use or not use these things to the best of our health, both physically and mentally.
So I went to the doctor and I took some urine and blood analysis, and they started talking to me about alcoholism. Now, I don't drink, but they were convinced I was an alcoholic because my liver enzymes were elevated. Then we got around to a discussion about caffeine. It turned out that I was drinking anywhere from 3 to 4 grams of caffeine a day. You can kill yourself drinking too much caffeine, but I prided myself on long work hours back then, and it was really bad. So what's caffeine doing? Caffeine is causing the liberation of adrenaline from your adrenals, these 2 little marble-sized glands above your kidneys. That tends to activate the so-called sympathetic nervous system, make you a little bit more prone to move, bring some alertness to your body. And then simultaneously, it's causing the release of norepinephrine and epinephrine from this little cluster of neurons called locus coeruleus. So the brain is being hosed with a little bit of epinephrine as we speak right now. In addition, it's triggering a dopamine increase, but not by triggering the release of dopamine directly. Caffeine increases the sensitivity of dopamine receptors. So whatever dopamine is floating around in your system and my system, the caffeine is amplifying that effect, not necessarily by making it a longer effect, by making the intensity a little bit higher. The other thing that caffeine does, and this is perhaps the most important one, is that it effectively prevents the action of a molecule called adenosine. Adenosine is a molecule that...
All right, let me pause that for just a moment because I find it very interesting that caffeine doesn't trigger dopamine as a stimulant. I would think that it did have an effect on dopamine that was even greater than he just described. So knowing that it uses what dopamine's already in your system is probably a better thing, especially if you're already eliminating a lot of stimulants from your life, because you're not getting dopamine from artificial sources all that often anyway. So being able to amplify the effect of what dopamine you have, if you don't have very much, is probably not a terrible thing. The problem, I think, comes in when we have too many other stimulants that we're already using that are boosting our dopamine artificially and taking us to a level where we're constantly going up with dopamine, and coffee would be amplifying that effect. But dopamine already has a tendency to, when you come down off of it, that you go way below baseline. And that was what causes you to need even more. It becomes like the drug addiction cycle where you need a little more and a little stronger each time to be able to carry on. So that's interesting to note that caffeine doesn't have that direct effect on dopamine. So let's go back just a little bit here.
Caffeine does, and this is perhaps the most important one, is that it effectively prevents the action of a molecule called adenosine. Adenosine is a molecule that builds up the longer that you are awake, and then when you sleep, adenosine gets pushed back down to a minimal level. Adenosine essentially is a readout of fatigue overall. So if we were to stay up for 2 days, adenosine levels would be very high. So in terms of a practical tool, I do try and restrict my caffeine intake, or at least most of it, to the early part of the day. I'll stop drinking caffeine sometime, usually around 3 or 4 p.m. I don't drink any high amount of caffeine after 4 p.m. and generally not coffee. But when you wake up in the morning, depending on how well and how long you slept, your levels of adenosine might be zeroed out and you feel really alert, or you might have a small amount of adenosine hanging around. If you drink caffeine right away, what happens is caffeine essentially binds to the receptor that adenosine would normally occupy.
It's an antagonist.
It's an antagonist, but it's what we call a competitive agonist because it binds, so it's an agonist, but it outcompetes the adenosine, so the adenosine can't dock at those receptors. So that's great because you start to wake up. But then around 2 or 3 p.m., as that caffeine wears off, the adenosine that's still around binds to those receptors and you get the afternoon crash. So one way that you can avoid the afternoon crash, or at least offset quite a bit of it, is to wait 90 to 120 minutes after you wake up to ingest any caffeine. It is important to hydrate early in the day too. Caffeine is very dehydrating. It causes for various reasons related to its effects on the kidneys, you start to.
That's very interesting. My wife, she can't hardly start her day without a cup of coffee first thing in the morning, and that's just been the case since I've known her. The fact that she's been cutting it down to 1 or 2 cups in the morning has been encouraging. It would just be interesting to see if it has a tremendous effect on her lifestyle, and maybe some of you can let me know if you're a first thing in the morning coffee drinker. You know, most of us joke when I used to drink coffee, I used to joke about it. You know, don't talk to me till I've had my coffee, because that's the first thing I've got to do to be able to get awakened. And then I used to drink coffee throughout the day because, I wanted to avoid that crash. This is very interesting to understand how our brain works and how it deals with this caffeine.
For various reasons related to its effects on the kidneys, you start to excrete sodium and potassium and the electrolytes. And those, the action potential, the firing of neurons that we were talking about earlier, is mediated by the entry of sodium into the nerve cells, and to some extent the exit of potassium. It's a coordinated dance there. You need electrolytes for your nerve cells to fire. So when you're dehydrated, you can't think as well. You can't function as well at the neuromuscular junction. So the first thing I do when I wake up is drink water. I mean, you should hydrate first thing in the morning. Obviously, you should use the bathroom too if you need to do that. But then push out that caffeine intake a little bit. And it's a little uncomfortable at first, and some people don't experience an afternoon crash, or people that are going back for more caffeine in the afternoon, they often find that they can drop or halve the amount of caffeine that they're drinking in the afternoon, which then has a nice cascade on the sleep system and the ability to fall asleep.
Often I hear when coffee comes up, people talk about adrenal fatigue and pineal calcification. I'm not sure.
Okay.
Are these legitimate sort of phenomenons, or have you looked into those?
Yeah. So adrenal burnout is a myth. I'm not saying that burnout is a myth, by the way. Adrenal burnout is not a real thing. The adrenals don't burn out. Your adrenals are immensely powerful. They were designed to take you through famine and horrible experiences and challenges that could go on 3 lifetimes. There is something called adrenal insufficiency syndrome, which is a legitimate syndrome where the adrenals don't produce enough adrenaline or enough cortisol, because the adrenals have a multi-layers, and cortisol is released from one compartment and cells in one compartment and adrenaline from the other. You can create a system of, wired and tired in your brain and body that comes from excessive caffeine intake. I think it makes sense to not overindulge in caffeine. And over the years, I'll tell you a story very briefly. In graduate school, I became jaundiced. So I went to the doctor and I took some urine and blood analysis, and they started talking to me about alcoholism. Now, I don't drink. I used to have a drink or two now and again, but they were convinced I was an alcoholic because my liver enzymes were elevated. Then we got around to a discussion about caffeine. It turned out that I was drinking anywhere from 3 to 4 grams of caffeine a day. A typical cup of coffee is maybe 200, 500 milligrams. You can kill yourself drinking too much caffeine. And I wasn't on.
That is so interesting to hear that caffeine can have the effect that it mimics liver damage from alcohol. Because before I started Lion Diet, I was drinking Bai drinks, which have coffee bean juice in them, which is high in caffeine. But I never thought of it, how it affected my liver. And my liver was actually not in danger, according to my doctor, but my gastroenterologist was a little concerned that I was at the beginnings of either non-alcoholic or alcoholic fatty liver disease. The fact that I was drinking a lot of those, and I was also drinking coffee, and I was also drinking tea, but I was having some little blips on the radar about my liver prior to doing this diet. And since I haven't had a whole lot of coffee, especially in the first 7 or 8 months of doing Lion Diet, I had none whatsoever. And that was really when I did my best. It's only since I've added a few things back to this diet that I have start to feel like I go back to the old way of feeling and operating. And coffee has been one that, even though I feel like I need it sometimes, to me it's just another reason to leave it on the shelf, to have one less thing to spend money on, for one, and one less thing to be dependent upon for me to get through my day.
My way to death, but I was drinking far too much caffeine. But I prided myself on long work hours back then, and it was really bad, I think. And it was hard to taper that back. Now I drink usually a cup or two of coffee early in the day. Yerba mate is my preferred source of caffeine. Some days I don't drink any coffee. So you can really overdo it. I don't think you're going to burn out your adrenals. I think you're going to be stressed too often. You're just burning up energy. And we hear about fuel energy in the body, something you know far more about than I do, the utilization of fuel energy. But neurons in our nervous system have a sort of what I would call neural energy, the ability to focus, the ability to stay engaged. That's based on the dopamine and the noradrenaline system. And if you are chronically in a state of go, and I should mention that dopamine and adrenaline, when they are enriched in our body and they're released in our brain, we tend to focus on that exteroception, things outside the boundaries of our skin. It's all about what we don't have going on now, or that we don't already possess, that we need and want.
So they're motivating us.
They are motivating us, but that being in pursuit is fatiguing over time. Whereas there are other neuromodulators and neurotransmitters like serotonin, oxytocin, things related to the anandamide system that are more about feeling content with what we already have or what's in the confines of our skin. The beautiful place we happen to live in, the people that we happen to have, social connection, they tend to be very soothing. And, for better or for worse, a lot of our success in life professionally and our ability to obtain those relationships and those things come from being in pursuit. But you have to think of this as a seesaw that you need to be able to run back and forth on. You can't just be in full pursuit of things all the time. You have to learn how to turn that off. And so I guess the point is that with excessive intake of caffeine or stimulants of any kind, nicotine, caffeine, you're going to run into a problem where you'll feel lousy without it. You'll start to feel a little bit more depressed. And for people who have underlying issues with OCD or who have underlying anxiety, for people that tend to ruminate, for people that tend to have insomnia, it makes sense. You're just ingesting far too many stimulants.
Yeah, it's not going to be for every.
Gosh, he just described exactly the way my lifestyle was prior to doing Lion Diet. I've always been one that tends to ruminate, and one that has a little bit. I used to joke about OCD, like I'm Monk, the defective detective, because he has these weird OCDs and the things that cause him to just be obsessed over things. I wasn't quite as bad as Monk, but we used to joke about it anyway. And I don't have that same obsession anymore. I still do things like whenever I get gas at the pump, it always has to have the same numbers across the thing. That's one of my weird little things. But yeah, I'm definitely been one to do that and prone to anxiety. I've been dealing with a lot of adversity in my life lately, but it has not affected me the way it did before Lion Diet, before getting all of this stuff out of my system. But over these past couple of weeks, and maybe it's because we're moving into the house, work hasn't been doing quite as good as it should because we were expected to have a pickup for the summer, and it really hasn't picked up all that much. And when you've got a new house that you're about to start paying for, and you've got less money coming in, and you've got the extra pressure of trying to do basically 2 jobs, doing a YouTube channel and my full-time job, it can be a lot. It can be a lot on your plate. And there have been times in the past 2 weeks where I have literally felt like, those scenes where you've seen like a guy working at his computer desk and then he just starts hitting the keyboard and he picks the keyboard up and smashes it down because he's had it with the computer. I have had moments where I know from my past way of thinking that I've had moments where I could very easily lose my cool the way I used to. But thankfully, this change in diet and the change in mental status has helped me to be able to just be okay. It's just one more thing you got to deal with, and to be able to be comfortable with that, and to be able to, use my spirituality and my faith to be able to push through without letting it build up in me like it used to. But it has still been harder lately because it's like day after day after day, having everything spread out all over the place like we're doing while we're moving. I can't find things I need when I need them. It's slowing me down and doing stuff I need to do. And like I say, I have a lot on my plate. Anything I can do to reduce that by not taking in things that are going to cause more, this is definitely the kind of thing that I need to hear about caffeine so that I can continue to limit that in my diet, simply because even if it does have some beneficial effects, it just seems so much better to operate without those crutches and without those dependencies on things that have side effects that are not positive.
At least not at a certain dose.
Right. You have to find the sweet spot. And I always say that when you haven't slept well is when you should drink less caffeine. When you've slept really well, you can get away with drinking more caffeine because you're more regulated. The autonomic nervous system is also like a seesaw. You have this, what we call sympathetic or alertness system, and then you have a parasympathetic nervous system. And they're controlled by different neurons and molecules in the body. But don't think about the seesaw as you. What's happening is you have the seesaw inside of you, and you're kind of running back and forth. Okay, it's like, get to the appointment and have the meeting, do the podcast. Okay, we're really lasered in, and then do you have the ability afterwards to adjust that seesaw back? When you're sleep deprived, the hinge on that seesaw becomes very loose. So it's sort of like, boom, you're just locked in. I got to go, and then you're exhausted. And so when you haven't slept well, you can probably get away with drinking a little bit of caffeine, but your whole system is dysregulated. When you've slept really well, you can probably drink more caffeine and feel more in control of your mind and body. So it's a little counterintuitive. Yeah, exactly.
Oh, wow. It is definitely counterintuitive. That is not what I would have expected to think, because I've been talking about how the reason I'm using more caffeine is because it's not that I'm not sleeping well. I'm just not having that regular sleep the way it should be. I'm going to bed after midnight a lot of nights, and some nights I'm going to bed at 8 or 9 o'clock. And just that offsetting of your time schedule really changes the way you work physiologically, and it's been a noticeable effect. And I share this with you guys because I know a lot of you you can't let go of your coffee, and I'm not here to try to come between you and your coffee, but I am here to try to help you find the best things for your overall health and your overall ability to maintain and do what you got to do each day, because I'm right there with you. The struggles are real. And with all the craziness in the world right now, I know we're all feeling a lot more pressure than under normal circumstances. So who knows? Maybe if you can, follow some of the advice he had, like maybe starting your first coffee an hour and a half or 2 hours after you wake up, it could benefit you. Maybe doing a staggered thing where he talked about having heavier caffeine in that early period, and then if you do have more caffeine throughout the day, make it half as much later on. But for me, I really want to try to focus on just not being dependent on these things, because if you're getting the right sleep, you shouldn't need them, and if you don't need them, you don't need the side effects that come with them. Well, that's what I think about the issue, and I just wanted to be able to share that with you guys and take a look at it. And I love the way Dr. Huberman goes into it. Hey guys, stick around for a quick message from Carnivore Crisps. I still love my Carnivore Crisps, and I recommend them because they're great for when you're going through your day and you've had your one meal a day like I've had today. Sometimes near the end of the day, it gets real easy to want to go munch on something. And if I'm going to munch on anything in the last part of the day and break my one meal a day fast, it might as well be something with the ingredients like Carnivore Crisps, grass-fed beef, water, and salt. And nothing else. Nothing else in there that's going to make me wish I hadn't had it. Check it out, and I'll see you guys next time.
we pay extra, could we maybe get some grease or fat?